thank you to Adrian and to all of you. Big thank you to Aston University and to all who are sponsoring and to Expertise, of course, for the invitations. It's rare, actually, that I get to stand up and literally say, before I go on to my stuff, I'd like to repeat what Adrian just said. I'm going to talk about BigSpark, but I just think I want you to really remember these things. Think big, but start small, and show the art of the possible. I'm going to be talking about the role of AI, and I think it's time for us to think differently. Think about the art of the possible. That's a great place to start. Always, always align to the business and the strategy. You know, you as a group will surely understand the hype cycle more than anybody else. We don't do AI or data or any of this because we are, you know, like, other than for really just for strategy. What are the business benefits? What's the ROI? What is this new capability, which is what it is, going to deliver to your business, to our businesses? And then finally, build an ecosystem around you. You do need to bring in external voices. So I have to say, we'll move on to BigSpark now. You know, we would agree. And I think the external voice is one, to Adrian's point, bring in the competent people who have done this before, and bring in the people who aren't in your swim lane, they're not in your company, they will have a different perspective. And they will give you ideas that are really quite different, and that's what we like to pride ourselves on. So I do want to thank you for, I think, a marvellous slide. So let's talk then a little bit about BigSpark. Let's talk about BigSpark first. BigSpark, quite simply, delivers AI and data solutions. That's what we do. I'm fortunate to have the CEO and a founder in the room. You look us up and you look at the success of BigSpark, it's because it's built from engineers who have, from the ground up, been on the core face of delivery, actually primarily in tier 1 banking and finance institutions. But you know, what's core to us is using AI and data for good. So if you think about BigSpark, don't really think you need to think about much other than we deliver solutions aligned with you, aligned with the strategy, and we do so in a way that we're committed to doing good. That's really important. For me, I spent 23 years in engineering. To my shame, I guess 23 years at Microsoft, leading large teams like Windows and Skype and things like that, and contributing to the Teams communication stack. And then actually stalled at Microsoft because I was leading Azure deployments across Europe, and I saw regulation becoming more of a bear and impeding, in some sense, our innovation and growth more than I saw our ability to deliver engineering solutions. And so I went off and did a law degree, to cut it short. Then I came back and started advisory, and I'm now starting the AI advisory at BigSpark. So that's just a bit about me. So today, I thought in the august group of people who are studying and who know about data, particularly from the academic and business point of view, I just wanted to focus today on our learning, putting it back to Adrian's point, like what have we actually done, and hopefully, I hope, give some tips and hints, and I'd love to receive some tips and hints from you all about what's going on in the industry and what we're seeing as practitioners. So first of all, we will have to start with definitions, don't we? So what really is AI? I think we can all debate this. I've put here, you can read the different definitions. I think the first takeaway from a slide like this is there are different definitions in very many key jurisdictions across the world. And I think the other thing is the spirit. So what you don't see written on the slide is the spirit of the different definition. And the spirit is actually probably as you might expect. I don't know, I shouldn't say. The US actually issues AI rights and is very concerned. To the extent that they're regulating, it's very much aligned with the idea of the consumer, the product, you know, essentially the capitalist economy. If you're purchasing something and it has AI within it, then you have, you know, just as you would with any product, you have an opportunity to contest and discuss and so on. On the EU, as I'm sure you're all aware, the EU is legislated on the basis of human rights, and it becomes a citizen's right to be treated in a particular way, and that's compatible, of course, with the GDPR legislation that by now we should all be very, very familiar with, and if you're not, please see me after this presentation. And then finally, we've got the UK. I'm not going to talk too much about China right now, but we've got the UK who are, you know, being the UK, I think, we've got regulators. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute, but they're really, I think at the moment there's a little bit of a concept that let's see what's going on, and that might actually prove wise, because certainly you don't want to get ahead of the game when you're delivering regulation and legislation for AI. So, as the Monty Python sketch said, what did the AI ever do for us? So in the tradition of actually using AI, of course, scraped to websites and went out and ran some queries across everybody's site, which is relatively easy to do, a little bit painstaking, but relatively easy with generative AI to find these things out. And back to Adrian's point, the first thing is to focus on what's the ROI? So that's the first question I asked across all of the attendees I thought might be using the public domain. And you can see here that frankly, some of the returns are just like it is an existential thing, right? The level of return on investment that you can retrieve by applying and deploying AI is going to be transformative. End of. I can talk to the one of greater than 80% productivity increase. I can say it was a government organisation, and it was about writing queries. And could we make the queries be written faster in SQL? And our answer was, why are we writing the queries? Why aren't you just asking the data? Why? There's a couple of things that you can take away from that, and we measured it to be more than 80% at least. I think that was conservative. From the websites that you hold, obviously it's all anonymous, people are reporting 993% improvement to target direct marketing clients. I'm sure that that's true. I think we're really changing the shape of how to communicate. It's much more easily to personalize, much more easy to customize. There are all sorts of things you can now do. And what might be another one? Well, just generally, we've heard Adrian talk about just return on investment, just your capital investment, your processes, to what extent can you see a return, and on what timeline. So not only do we at BigSpark deliver solutions, but we deliver solutions very focused on time to market and time to value, because really I think that's what we're all going to be paying attention to. So AI is at least critical to us. So then we've got another problem going on there. So I don't think there's any doubt that AI is going to run a race, and we should embrace it early. But I also think fundamentally, and this comes to the sort of the law and learning the ethics of law and thinking about societies, and to Osama's introduction at Aston, and making sure that we're really advantaging all of us, then really you do actually, I would advocate, and BigSpark advocates in our Data for Good and AI for Good, is that you have to have an ethical point of view. And so responsible AI and applying it and making that real in terms of engineering terms, hardcore engineering terms, is what we believe is very important. So it's not just about getting the ROI, it's about getting the ROI responsibly. And doing it through the life cycle. And recently, I'm sure you all saw this, there's a lot of jokes about computer scientist gets Nobel Prize in physics, but we'll leave that there. But the recent achiever of the Nobel Prize in physics is advocating, often the term the godfather of AI, obviously very learned, and he is saying, we basically carry the responsibility for using this technology in a safe and ethical way. And I think that's true. I think that we will be using AI, and particularly a group like this, it's for all of us now to walk out of this room today and think about what we can do to make sure that that is being deployed in an ethical way. And gone is the day when, frankly, a developer can, or it should be gone, not quite yet. A developer, or essentially a very technically minded, brilliant person, works alone in a room and builds some algorithms and runs them loose. I think that's probably not where it's all going, and it shouldn't be where it's going. I think we've got to have the check and balance. And to some of the challenges around jobs and what's happening next, I actually advocate for, I think there's going to be an increase in multidisciplinary awareness. So we're hearing Adrian talk about when they stopped ChatGPT, he mentioned legal. I'm sure legal counsel were coming out, probably the CEOs coming out, probably the chief data officers. People are actually aware and interested, and it's upon us all now to think about what it is to be responsible. So spread the word. So what about that? So do we just get to decide what we do? The fat part of this is fairness, accountability, and transparency. I think in any presentation I've been to, or what I've read, I would say everybody says fairness, accountability, and transparency. And of course, because many theories are rooted in the sense of human rights, you've also got to pay attention to privacy. And at least in the EU, they've built upon the framework that started off with the GDPR principles of 2018. So at this level, cool, we can all go out and do this. We can look at fairness and accountability and transparency. No problem, right? But it's actually a bit harder than that. So this is just a little, I mean, you never know, and I'm sure you're doing this to educate your own boards and your own leadership. It's difficult to know what to pick out of the burgeoning and growing set of requirements that are imposing themselves either as a legal mandate or as a heavy piece of guidance for which you can be fined. So what are some of the true landmarks on here? Well, obviously the enactment of the EU AI Act, which became law on the 1st of August this year, and which will and is being rolled out in stages. So prohibited AI is going to be banned by the end of this year. EU member states have the right to test and evaluate whether or not your AI is in a particular category. That's a very important area. We've got specifically EU is bringing out at the bottom here, you can see very specific technical requirements that must be met. And finally, you're also seeing, for example, even in the UK now, we've got the ISO 42001, is what I would say, all coming out new. So it's all new. So if everybody's feeling a little overwhelmed, probably it should be, actually. But again, we at BigSpark are investing a great deal. And then to the point of it's overwhelming, and there's a lot, and it's changing all the time. I encourage you to keep monitoring. There's been a lot of criticism. I'm an American and an EU citizen, so my American friends say we don't regulate, we're American. Don't quote me on that. But the thing about regulation is at least it's certain. At least you know whether you like or dislike what's being said. You do know what you're accountable for. But in the UK, we are kind of rolling out, and it's a little risky right now because there are very significant variations. So first of all, it's been left to the regulators, and you can see here you've got your favourites like Ofcom or the FCA, MHRA, Medical Health Regulatory Authority has started to legislate. They're the one, I think, for 15 who are starting to write real laws and statements. But we actually have this artificial intelligence bill under review in the House of Lords. And what that's doing is reversing some of the assumptions everyone had about copyright, and I'll come to that in a bit. So you've kind of picked your poison. Do you want to be regulated, or do you not want to be regulated and run the risk that it comes after you after the fact? And all of this, I advocate, to Adrian's point, you get an external voice, and we at BigSpark are trained in law and technology. And so I think increasingly the space, and that's why I left Microsoft personally, is I think the space of pure disciplines is getting reduced, and I think you have to have a very good awareness, at least of the civil code, and especially if you're trying to introduce ethics. So let's go back to the certainty. So this is the law. This is one that is law. So I've just picked out some just key points that you might want to share with your within your own organisation's back if you weren't already aware. So first of all, it is an extraterritorial law. I used to call it extraterrestrial when I started, but it wasn't true. So the extraterritorial law just simply means that if you are giving services to EU citizens, it doesn't matter if they're living in England. If they're an EU citizen, they have a right? Remember, it's a human right. So you can't say that, oh, it's EU law, I don't care. You may not care, but you probably do. It is the law. The high-risk AI is, they have prohibited high, medium, low. High pertains to anything, and it goes to Osama's conversation earlier, anything that's viewed as gating socio-economic success, such as mortgage granting, lending, insurance. If you're providing a service that's affecting communities and possibly limiting the disadvantaged or the vulnerable, you're in a high-risk category. And then you'll see that the member states are empowered, if not required, actually, if you look at the implementation directives, to start setting up sandboxes. And it's their right to start testing that you're doing the responsible bit. So it's not just, you can't just say you're fair, it's all good. You're going to have, if you were, for example, a tier 1 bank and you're serving customers and you're issuing loans to a certain group, and then another group challenges the fairness with which loans or interest rates are being decided, then there's an opportunity for the state to prove, ask you to prove that you're doing it correctly. So it's all quite real. So this just, slides take away. these are the different levels. The prohibited, as I've said, there should no longer be the running of prohibited AI as of December 31st, 2024, end of. So anyone who's in that category, and that tends to be things like credit scoring or biometrics. So if you're doing CCTV scanning, real-time biometrics, and then somehow using that in an improper way, you could be in a prohibited. So prohibited has got to be done by the end of the year. And you can read the rest for yourself. I think the really key point about this slide, and I've got to be a bit conscious of time. So somebody's going on along the thought. And you told me, just shout back in a minute. But one of the things I want you to be aware of is that the penalties, this is a very GDPR type fine thing, right? So 7.5% of your global turnover or up to 35 million, whichever is the greater, we're back to that again. And of course, the GDPR fines, which from memory I think are 4%, are on top. So it's not instead of, it's as well as. So what you should take away from this is it's important and it's a potential risk. And you just need to be aware. One of the things we're doing, so obviously at BigSpark, we're really interested in supporting you or being that external voice that Adrian was having. You know, to the questions, there's always that price question. We think we're very reasonably priced and we're very experienced. So what we've done though, just to, we want everyone to be successful. So what we've done on our website is we've broken some of these conversations into something that you can already start to consume. So if you go to bigspark.ai and start clicking through the responsible AI journey, we ask you to fill in these things because these things govern your potential risks. So what this means is, as I've explained, first of all, the AI regulation and even the definitions of what constitutes AI will differ by jurisdiction. So the first thing we ask you to fill in is like, where are you, what are you doing? Then, of course, based on the industry, we take the UK case, not the EU case, but in the UK, depending on the industry you're in, then you'll be with a different regulator, right? So if you're in financial services, you're with the FCA, and if you're in medicine, you're with the MHRA, and on we go, which was the slide I showed you just before. So that's important because, of course, they all have their own different rules, which makes it quite hard. And then I want to talk about risk and intention. We ask you about your risk and intention. We come back and then we give you some readout for all AI types. So hopefully, as you go away from this, meeting today, start playing with this. Of course, we're here to take any queries that you may have. But basically, what we've done is tried to give you the different pieces of legislation that we think, or regulation, I should better say, that's relevant based on that. So have a go. We'd love your feedback. We're just starting this because let's make no bones about it. A lot of this is new and moving, which is the prior few slides. The other thing that we've done though to this 10, I call it the 10+2, and we're training our staff on the 10+2, and we're happy to train your staff on the 10+2. What I've done with my team who are legally trained is we've spent actually quite some years now reading legislation across multiple main jurisdictions, at least the US, the EU, and the UK to start, and one might argue a couple of dabbles in Singapore, and then of course in the States it's all at the state level. But the thing is, we've just taken out of all of that a 10+2 to save you all the bother of having to go into the minutiae. Now to be clear, this is a starting point. You will of course, if you really want to validate compliant and audit and all those things, that's up to you. But what we've done is done the heavy lift, spent a lot of time reading this stuff. We've broken it down to the 10 principles of AI responsibility, so things like fairness, security, privacy, and I won't bore you with the other 7. And then the 2 fundamentals, which won't surprise this group, is data quality and data provenance, which you probably hear less about data provenance, but that becomes increasingly important. So I guess what I try to leave you with is, we tried to help and we'd love your feedback. So there's a lot of information out here, so please do let us know what you think. So, with that said, this slide, I'm not going to stop here, but it goes back to Adrian's point about all that we've done has been proven in action. So we're not a group who sat down and drawn up some nice slides and put them out. There isn't a person in BigSpark, almost to a fault actually, who isn't writing code, looking at data, analysing, studying the laws. Like we're a very practical group really. But you can see we have been through, we've got lots of battle scars, so we've gone through the steps that I'm showing you here concretely, And we're doing that in alignment with building up the target operating model vis-a-vis the responsibility goals, because it's one thing, again, to talk about these things in the abstract, but it's okay, so show me your data and prove it's fair. Okay, what do I do? So just to conclude, and hopefully I have to get my notes here because I represent a lot of people at BigSpark on this. I just thought I'd talk about, the spirit of what we're doing. We're introducing the principles of responsible AI to all that we do. But things, here are some practical things that we've done. So, first of all, modern data quality, our example of that is using DQ, we runs on DQ, for example, in a tier 1 bank. That gave us an ability to start verifying against the 6 qualities of data quality, 6 principles of data quality, completeness, accuracy, and so on. So that was our primary use there. It was a tier 1 bank. We did that using Apache. It's licensed under, because that's an interesting thing, it was open source, it's the Apache 2.0 license. That goes back to a little bit of provenance. You've got to pay attention to what you're using and the cost, because obviously as well, back to that ROI, the methods not only have to be effective and demonstrable and transparent, they also have to be cost effective, right? So that's a good example there. If we go on to data and AI provenance, that's where I think really I would talk more about understanding things like where did the data come from, and where is the data that you generate going? And keywords there from practice are things like copyright, like screen scraping is not okay necessarily. And so just because you've got some data from a screen scrape, is it actually a valid provenance? Maybe. Depends what country you're in, because the laws vary. You have to think about as well the adequacy. So I worked on one thing, actually I talked to somebody earlier about clinical trials. In a prior life, I was looking at clinical trials and they wanted to obviously use data and AI to improve results. But when you're talking about data at that level, international exchange around COVID, it was, you have to think about adequacy. So you're exchanging data between different territories. So if you will, one problem is the source and have you got the right copyrights and the right intellectual property rights, and are you managing the output correctly? But another thing is, even if you do, if you send that data to another country in any way, then you have to be sure that the adequacy requirements around that data are in place as well. So that's another thing I would say about provenance. And then of course the licenses, I mentioned something like whenever you're using open source, which I would strongly recommend, and we, I think as an organisation, very often adopt open source. But when you're using open source, you do have to just respect the license, and that goes back to the provenance. And it also goes back to the fact that you should probably be in inventory and managing correctly. And none of this need be very scary, so long as you know what you're doing, I guess is the key point. Back on security, another good example for us is, well, actually Adrian commented on one key part of security, and I did this with a government group too, which is a lot of people sort of get caught up in public cloud or ChatGPT, and hopefully not this group. But there are, of course, many forms of AI, and they have many cost models, and they are designed for very many different optimizations, like it might be natural language and translation, which would be BERT, as an example, or it might be ChatGPT Omni 4, which is the interface between different, each of these models is designed to do a different thing and has a different price point. So going back to security, one of the good things you can do yourself is set yourself up in an entirely secure center, which it sounds like what Adrian did. And like I applaud the decision to say, controversial, because I was in a company as well that said no ChatGPT, and I've never seen so many senior leaders run into one room at one point in time. Like, it was just very strange. But I think actually that's probably, if you don't understand why you're using ChatGPT, maybe you shouldn't be, until you're ready. And so one of the things we think about for security is just take pick the model that is appropriate to go, what Adrian said about business strategy. What's your business strategy? What's the ROI goal? Then think about what is the model, whether that be genuinely public, and whether or not your risk appetite is appropriately matched. If the use case and your risk appetite and the model are appropriately matched to go public and use a public vendor API, then do it that way. But that's anyway a way of managing security before I go on there. for privacy, but also we can do things like logged BERT is a way of, for example, in another client, we just looked at the logs, and we could, another more what I call tactical implementation of security is there's a bank and they're concerned that they're getting taken offline through malicious threat. And so what we did there was we used LogBERT, and we looked at we got standardized logs. Then we did a comparison between the standardized logs and what we were seeing. And from that, we're able to triage, again, using AI to see, classification essentially, to see which ones were actually just not, if you will, normal offline, and which one were actually security threats, and then we took it forward from there. So that was another example we had. On privacy, here I would advocate, I think, because obviously a few minutes, it's hard to share all this, but so for privacy, I would say think about those data subject rights. So I mentioned earlier, I'm sure we've all got GDPR down now. So you'll remember, I'm sure, things like data removal, transparency, non-discriminatory access. You've got to be able to ensure and demonstrate consent. All those things that we've been doing now, hopefully for 6 years. Now your AI has to do them all. So when you're setting up AI, you have to ask yourself the question, to what extent are you exposing transparency to the extent that the AI you can demonstrate that the way that you use that data, which you did get the right provenance on and that you do have the right to use, now you've just got to be able to demonstrate that you offer the right things like the right to be forgotten to a consumer. Can you do that? Can you isolate their data and then remove them from the system, or are they somehow embedded in a model? So that's the kind of thing to think about there. And I'm conscious I'm just rolling, but a couple of other things. Let me just do one on explainability and one on life cycle, so I don't run too long. So I would say for explainability, what we did, my example, we did Shapley. We used the Shapley technique. Some of you may be aware of this. And so that allows you to look at your model and what you've trained it on, and it allows you to prove what features are most likely to drive changes in the outcome. And so using that the Shapley line, and I think there's another one that I would recommend looking at, you can basically start saying, okay, have a large language model. The use of AI is now driving recommendations to a population. So using this method, you can start to trace, but that's not quite enough, because even if you now can start understanding why a change in A drives a result that's different through the AI into the outcome, you've also then got to be able to try and get that out and present that to people in a human readable form, because that's what constitutes explainability. So if you will, you can take something like LogBERT and you can marry it, you can take the Shapley technique and then you can marry it with something like TabBERT. Remember, I said BERT is particularly good at natural language intonations and representation. So if you have traced what features are driving model and therefore showing explainability, then you can wrap that in a BERT wrapper or put it in the English language. And a good example of why you might want to do that in our real world experience is tier 1 banking fraud. So in fraud, it's not enough to be able to just say it is fraud or it is not fraud. You actually have to be able to give a clear breakdown of why you've made that supposition and what you've done. So that's where we use that. And then last but by no means least, the life cycle. I'll say nothing about that other than there's no such thing as fire and forget in AI. Life cycle, it's, once an AI is out there, it is running, and it is, we all understand data drift, data skew. It could be self-modifying. There are all sorts of things we're going in, so it's not enough it's not a fire and forget model. And I think this might be, because I think I've seen that many surveys show things like, I will misquote, but it's something like 70% of the pilots that run, maybe 10% make it to production. And I think that's because people start thinking too late about how they're going to monitor and maintain that AI once it's been deployed and in market. And so and I should say, for all of the things we do, I thoroughly advocate begin with the end in mind, think big. You may want to choose something small, but you should have thought through the things that are in this deck. I would say just apply to most projects. You should know what jurisdiction you're running in, what sort of AI you've got, whether or not you're going to be regulated, yes or no, where you got your data from, where you spit your data to, who had the right to do all that in the first place, and to what extent could you demonstrate that in a court of law if you had to. maybe not the last piece, hopefully, but the rest of it, I think, is just business as usual these days. So, so what, we'll give next steps. Sorry about type at the bottom, but so this is how we look at it. And again, we would be delighted to be an external voice, working with your teams, with your organisations, or perhaps you just refer us to an organisation who you think might benefit. We're very scalable. We'll work with you as you need. We adapt. But we view it this way, and it goes back to Aidan's point. Find out what the reward is. What is it you're trying to do, really? Like, what is it? What is the ROI? I have no doubt that you'll find one. And I think that the ROI will be quite transformative. Like, I'm an ideas person, I've got lots of patents. So for me, there's just like there are lots and lots of opportunities. I don't think anyone will have trouble with that. But you do have to say, what have we got, what is it I'm trying to get to? What have I got right now? Where is my data? And be honest, because we all know what real data looks like. Any of us have been working in the industry. And then say, but where's your risk appetite and your policies? Right, so because that's going to be you might need to change them, or you might need to double down with it. It doesn't matter. But so where are you starting? And inherent in that statement of reward, which is where we should phrase it, there's going to be some risks, and that's, I think, a good place to start. And then you get ready. You'll notice I've put compliance way on the right. This is not a compliance conversation. This is about readiness. This is about, we've all, think about it this way. Imagine that we're all going to run a marathon. And, you can speak for yourself right now, but I'm not ready to run a marathon today. But I could run a marathon. I just got to get ready, and I've got to start getting stuff in place now. That within, 7 months, did a half marathon this year? We did. I actually probably won't do a real marathon. But anyway, the key is get ready. You're in a great spot right now. There is, to some extent in the UK, not unless you're in the Medical Health Regulatory Authority and being governed there, you have an amnesty period to be aware and ready, because the EU law is enacted, prohibited AI is going to be shut down the end of the year. High risk, I'm sure you'll all be interested to know high risk is essentially, I think it's July 1st next year, they can start fining. So we've got this wonderful period of time to, get fit. So we have a readiness checklist, happy to talk. And if you don't use us, I do really, really counsel using someone. So thank you for listening.